The ground shakes. A monstrous machine rumbles forward, its massive steel blade crashing through the last standing wall. The impact sends a deafening crack through the air as wood splinters, glass shatters, and dust erupts in a thick, suffocating cloud. The once cozy home, a place of memories, laughter, and quiet evenings, collapses in on itself, reduced to nothing more than a pile of rubble. A group of construction workers stand by, watching the final pieces crumble. One of them wipes the sweat from his brow, looking at the destruction with mild indifference. "Guess that's that," he mutters. Another worker shrugs, kicking at a broken picture frame buried under debris. "Yeah, HOA wanted it gone, so it's gone." They pack up their tools, load into their trucks, and drive away, leaving behind only dust and silence. A few minutes later, the silence is broken. The deep growl of an approaching SUV echoes down the street, its polished black exterior reflecting the afternoon sun. It rolls to a slow stop, tires crunching over shattered wood and drywall. The driver's door swings open. A man steps out, adjusting the cuffs of his suit, his posture rigid, his face unreadable behind dark sunglasses. He takes a single step forward, then another. His polished shoes disturb the wreckage beneath him, kicking up small puffs of dust. For a long moment, he just stands there, staring. There's nothing left. The porch swing where he used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings, gone. The kitchen where he spent hours perfecting his omelette recipe, obliterated. His bedroom, his office, his personal belongings, shattered, buried, or simply erased. His home, gone. His jaw tightens. A slow, measured breath fills his lungs before he exhales through his nose. He doesn't yell. He doesn't curse. He doesn't break down in shock or despair. Instead, he reaches into his pocket, pulls out his phone, and dials a number. It's Carter. His voice is low, controlled. "I need everything you can find on Oak Ridge HOA, and I mean everything." A pause, then a response. "Understood." Carter ends the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket. His fingers clench into a fist at his side. They had no idea what they had just done. Across the street, a woman watches from behind the safety of her lace curtains, a smug smile curling her lips. Karen Whitmore had been waiting for this moment. For months, she had complained about that house. It was disrupting the neighborhood. Never mind that it was well maintained. Never mind that the owner always paid his dues on time. In Karen's mind, the house didn't fit. The blinds were the wrong shade of beige. The flower beds weren't precisely symmetrical. And worst of all, the owner had the audacity to ignore her letters. She had written plenty. Strongly worded notices, warnings about violations, fabricated infractions designed to make his life miserable. And when he still refused to acknowledge her authority, she escalated. The HOA board was easy to manipulate. A few exaggerated complaints, some exaggerated concerns about property values, and Gerald Whitman, the ever-smug HOA president, had taken the bait. And now, Karen sipped her imported organic tea, savoring the moment. The house was gone. The neighborhood was better for it. She watched as the man across the street, finally realizing he had lost, stood motionless in the wreckage. She smirked. Serves him right. And then, for just a fraction of a second, he turned his head. Even from across the street, even through her window, even with the late afternoon glare, she could feel his gaze. Karen's smirk faltered. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something colder. She took a step back, her hand tightening around her teacup. Maybe she shouldn't have pushed so hard. Inside the air-conditioned walls of the Oak Ridge HOA office, Gerald Whitman leaned back in his leather chair, a satisfied grin stretching across his face. He swirled his overpriced espresso in its porcelain cup, savoring both the taste and the moment. Another house gone. Another step toward perfection. The office smelled of success. Polished wood, expensive cologne, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed arrogance. Framed awards lined the walls, certificates of excellence in community management. He had built Oak Ridge into one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. He had shaped it with an iron will, molding it into his own vision of suburban perfection. And anyone who didn't comply? Well, they were removed. He chuckled to himself, tapping the tip of his golf club against the floor. He barely looked up when his secretary, Linda, knocked hesitantly at the door. "Sir, there's a man here to see you." Gerald waved a hand dismissively. "If it's another homeowner whining about fees, tell them to book an appointment." Linda hesitated. I think you should see this one." Something in her tone made Gerald glance up, and then the door swung open. A man walked in, slow and deliberate. His suit was pristine, his steps controlled. He removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were ice cold. For the first time in a long time, Gerald felt something other than smug confidence. A sliver of unease crept up his spine. The man's voice was calm, controlled. "I want an explanation." Gerald blinked. Then, regaining his composure, he let out a small chuckle. "And you are?" The man stepped forward, placing a piece of paper on Gerald's desk with deliberate force. "Daniel Carter, the actual owner of the house you just bulldozed." Gerald's smirk twitched, just barely. "I think you're mistaken. The house that was demolished was abandoned. It was in clear violation of multiple HOA. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out another document. He unfolded it with a precision that was almost lethal in its calmness, then slid it across the desk. Gerald glanced down. His mouth opened slightly. Title deed. Daniel Carter's name. Clear as day. Property taxes, paid. HOA dues, paid. 0 violations. The smugness drained from Gerald's face, if only for a split second. He cleared his throat. Well, mistakes happen. Daniel tilted his head ever so slightly. A mistake? His voice was too calm. My home is gone. Everything in it, gone. I don't think oops quite covers that. Gerald let out a forced chuckle, waving a hand dismissively. Look, Carter, these things happen. The HOA has the legal right to remove properties that don't adhere to community standards. If you feel there's been a mistake, you're welcome to file a complaint. He leaned back in his chair, smirking again. Good luck with that. Daniel studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, he leaned forward. His voice dropped just slightly. You have no idea who you just messed with. For a fraction of a second, Gerald's smirk flickered, and then Daniel straightened. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office. Gerald chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Just another homeowner who thought he was special. He had no idea that Daniel Carter wasn't just a homeowner. He was a federal agent, and this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Gerald Whitman took a long, slow sip of his espresso, tapping his fingers against the polished wood of his desk. His heartbeat had settled. That Carter guy had been intimidating, sure, but in the end, he was just another disgruntled homeowner, and disgruntled homeowners were nothing new to Gerald. He had built an empire within Oak Ridge. An HOA wasn't just about keeping grass trimmed and fences the right shade of white. It was about control, power. Every single property, every homeowner, every fee paid, every violation issued, it all flowed through him. And that wasn't changing anytime soon. Still, something about Carter lingered in the back of his mind. The way he didn't raise his voice. The way he simply looked at him. Like a man who wasn't making threats, but promises. Gerald exhaled sharply and shook it off. Linda, he called toward the door, his voice casual. She appeared immediately, her face still uneasy from the encounter. "Sir?" "Pull up the paperwork on the Carter property," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Let's make sure we're covered. I don't want any surprises." Linda hesitated. "Sir, I already checked." She swallowed. His paperwork was in order. Gerald frowned. "Then how the hell did we get permission to bulldoze it?" Linda shifted nervously. "I don't know," she admitted. "The demolition order wasn't signed by a judge. It just showed up in the system. It was pushed through fast. Too fast." Gerald's fingers drummed against his desk. "I want to know who approved it." Linda hesitated again. Finally, she spoke. "Karen." Silence. Then Gerald's eye twitched. "Of course." Karen. The woman was a fanatic, a true believer in the cause of HOA enforcement. She didn't just follow the rules, she weaponized them. She saw violations where none existed, fought imaginary battles against disorder, and carried out her own form of justice with gleeful precision. And now, it seemed, she had overplayed her hand. Gerald pinched the bridge of his nose. "Get her in here." Linda nodded and scurried off. A few moments later, Karen swept into the office with an air of absolute righteousness. "Gerald," she chirped, all confidence and smug satisfaction. "I take it you called me in to thank me." Gerald looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. Karen beamed. "It's wonderful, isn't it? That blight on our community. Gone." She clapped her hands together. "I don't know why we didn't do it sooner." Gerald studied her. "You pushed through the demolition order." Karen's smile faltered, just a little. "Well, yes, but it was necessary." "You didn't follow protocol," Gerald interrupted. "You didn't verify ownership. You didn't check the records." Karen rolled her eyes. "Gerald, we all knew that house was an issue. It was an unspoken agreement among the board. I just accelerated the process." Gerald leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You accelerated the process," he repeated slowly. Karen nodded eagerly. "I fixed the problem." Gerald exhaled sharply through his nose. "You created a problem." Karen blinked. He leaned back again, drumming his fingers against the desk. "Do you have any idea who you just bulldozed?" Karen scoffed. "Just another homeowner who thought the rules didn't apply to him. Good riddance." Gerald let out a slow, humorless chuckle. "That homeowner is a federal agent." Karen's smirk faltered. Gerald watched her reaction carefully. He could see the wheels turning in her mind, could see the realization creeping in, slowly but surely. Still, she squared her shoulders, forcing a breathy laugh. "Oh, come on, Gerald. What's he going to do? File a complaint?" She smirked. "Let him try. We always win." Gerald didn't respond right away. Then he simply said, "You better hope so." Because for the first time he wasn't so sure. Daniel Carter stood in his temporary apartment, a manila folder open on the counter. Inside, pages of documents, HOA bylaws, financial reports, property deeds. He had spent hours making calls, pulling records, gathering every piece of information he could. And what he found? It was worse than he expected. The HOA wasn't just overreaching, it was corrupt to its core. Illegally issued fines, manipulated home values, properties seized and sold to board members' friends for a fraction of their worth. Fake maintenance fees funneled into private accounts. It wasn't just a case of incompetence, it was organized theft. And at the center of it all, Gerald Whitman. Daniel closed the folder, his jaw tightening. They had bulldozed his home, destroyed his belongings, erased years of his life without a second thought. And now? Now it was his turn. He picked up his phone and dialed. A voice answered on the other end. Yeah? It's Carter. His voice was cold, businesslike. I need a legal team, and I need it yesterday. A chuckle. That bad, huh? Worse. There was a pause. All right, I'll make some calls. What's your angle? Daniel's eyes darkened. I'm burning them to the ground. Inside the Oak Ridge HOA office, a board meeting was in progress. Gerald sat at the head of the table as usual, wearing his usual smirk, but this time there was tension behind his eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth, we have a minor situation. Murmurs rippled through the room. A homeowner, Daniel Carter, seems to believe his house was demolished unlawfully. More murmurs. Nervous glances. Steve, the sweat-prone board member, cleared his throat. Gerald, are we sure it was an abandoned property? Gerald shot him a sharp look. We are now, he said firmly. Steve swallowed hard. But if anyone asks, the house was abandoned, Gerald cut in, and we did everything by the book. Karen nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And if he has a problem, he can take it up with our appeals board. A few board members chuckled, because everyone knew the appeals board was a joke. They never ruled against the HOA. It was a game, and the house always won. Gerald exhaled, the tension easing slightly. Good. Then we move forward as planned. For a moment, everything seemed under control. Then the doors slammed open. A woman in a sharp suit strode inside, heels clicking against the floor, a stack of papers in her hands. Her expression was ice. Gerald Whitman? Gerald frowned. Who's asking? The woman set the papers down in front of him. My name is Sarah Hayes, she said, her voice clipped. I represent Daniel Carter. Gerald's smirk vanished. Sarah leaned in slightly. You're being sued. Gerald sat in stunned silence, staring at the legal papers on the table in front of him. His fingers twitched, hovering over the documents as if touching them would make this nightmare real. Karen, who had been so smug just moments ago, leaned over his shoulder to take a peek. Her eyes darted across the page, her confidence faltering with every line she read. Lawsuit, she whispered. Sarah Hayes, the lawyer standing before them, arched an unimpressed brow. Multiple lawsuits, actually, she corrected. Your HOA is being sued for wrongful destruction of property, illegal demolition, and financial damages. Oh, and let's not forget. She tapped a specific paragraph on the document. Destruction of classified federal documents. Gerald felt his stomach lurch. Karen scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder, desperately clinging to her bravado. Oh, please, this is just a scare tactic. We have lawyers too, and they always win. Just another angry homeowner trying to make a scene. Sarah smiled. Not the warm, reassuring kind of smile. No, this was the kind of smile that made people nervous. The kind of smile that said, you have no idea how deep you're in. I was expecting you to say that, she said calmly, which is why we've already taken the liberty of freezing your HOA's accounts. A ripple of shock ran through the room. Gerald's hands clenched into fists as he shot a glance at the rest of the board members. Linda, the secretary, was already frantically checking her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her banking app. Her face turned ghostly pale. Oh my God, she whispered. She's not bluffing. Our accounts are locked. What? Gerald shot up from his chair, grabbing his own phone. He pulled up the HOA's financial account, his heart hammering. It was true. The funds were completely frozen. No transactions allowed. No withdrawals. No access. Karen's face lost its color. But that money is now evidence in a federal case, Sarah finished for her. You might want to start rethinking your legal strategy. Gerald slammed his phone down, glaring at Sarah. You can't just… Oh, I can, Sarah interrupted smoothly. And I did. Your little operation has been under investigation for months. The moment Mr. Carter reached out to us, we had enough probable cause to take immediate action. Steve, the nervous board member, gulped. We should probably settle, he stammered. Maybe we can, negotiate. Gerald shot him a look so sharp it could have cut steel. We don't settle. But even as the words left his mouth, he could feel the room shifting. The board members weren't as confident as they had been before. For the first time in years, Gerald felt something he wasn't used to. A lack of control. Daniel Carter was watching everything unfold in real time. From his office downtown, he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable as he listened to Sarah's update. They're panicking, she reported. Their accounts are frozen, their legal team is scrambling, and from the way Whitman's face looked, I'd say he's very aware of how screwed he is. Daniel exhaled slowly. Good. But we're not done yet. Sarah's voice had a dangerous edge to it. The lawsuits are just the beginning. We need to go for the kill shot. Daniel rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Tell me what you need. Sarah didn't hesitate. I need a full forensic audit of their financials. Every fee, every fine, every maintenance charge they've ever issued. I want to find everything they've stolen. Daniel's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Consider it done. At Oak Ridge, panic was spreading like wildfire. The homeowners, once terrified of the HOA, were catching wind of the scandal. And this time, they weren't keeping quiet. By the end of the day, a crowd had gathered outside the HOA office, murmuring angrily. This whole time, they've been stealing from us? I got fined $500 because my mailbox was too dark. And now they're the criminals. They bulldozed a federal agent's house. How did they think they'd get away with that? Inside the office, Gerald was pacing like a caged animal, his mind racing. We need to get ahead of this, he hissed. We need control over the narrative. Karen, for once, had nothing to say. She was too busy scrolling through social media, her face growing paler by the second. The story was going viral. Local news stations were picking it up. Residents were sharing their own horror stories. Photos of the destroyed house were being everywhere. The once mighty HOA was crumbling. And then, a knock at the door. Not a polite one, not a friendly one. A loud, authoritative knock. Gerald froze. His pulse quickened. He turned toward the door, and the moment he saw who was standing there, his blood ran cold. 3 men. Dark suits. Badges. FBI. Karen barely managed to squeak out a protest before they stepped inside. Mr. Whitman, the lead agent said, voice calm but firm. We have a few questions regarding your financial records. Gerald swallowed hard. The agent didn't wait for an invitation. He walked straight past Gerald and gestured to his team. Start pulling records. The other agents moved like clockwork, collecting files, flipping through documents, securing hard drives. What? What is this? Karen demanded. You can't just come in here like this. The agent turned his gaze toward her. Actually, he said, holding up a search warrant. We can. Gerald gritted his teeth. His empire, his entire empire, was falling apart in front of him. This wasn't just some lawsuit he could brush off. This wasn't an angry homeowner filing an appeal. This was federal, and for the first time in his life, Gerald Whitman realized he was truly in trouble. A few miles away, Daniel Carter was sitting in his car, watching the scene unfold. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. His phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. HOA board is in full panic mode. FBI is pulling files. Whitman looks like he's about to pass out. Daniel smirked. Perfect. But he wasn't done yet. Because this was just the beginning. The neighborhood had never been this alive. For years, Oak Ridge had been a place of quiet fear, a place where residents whispered complaints in hushed tones, where mailboxes were measured with rulers, where violations were handed out like candy on Halloween. A place where homeowners paid absurd fines for microscopic cracks in their driveways, for flower beds that dared to be anything other than approved greenery, for daring to leave their trash cans out a minute too long. But today the streets were filled with something different. Laughter, joy, freedom. The once mighty HOA office stood empty, its doors locked, its power stripped away. The bank accounts, frozen, the board members, facing investigations. And the most delicious part, the HOA had been forced to liquidate its assets, to cover legal fees. Every desk, every chair, every overinflated luxury purchase made with stolen fees, sold. And Daniel Carter. He had made sure to buy the most important asset of them all, the HOA building itself. A month ago, that building had been the headquarters of a suburban dictatorship, the place where Karen and Gerald had sat, sipping their overpriced lattes, smirking as they plotted new ways to drain their neighbors of money. But now it was something better, something poetic. Daniel stood at the entrance, watching as the final touches were being completed. A massive wooden sign was being drilled into place. The workers took a step back, admiring their handiwork. The words carved into the wood read, Oak Ridge Community Dog Park, formerly the Oak Ridge HOA office, leash-free and tyrant-free. Daniel smirked. A week from now, this place would be filled with happy homeowners and their dogs. The same homeowners who had once been forced to pay fines for fences that weren't up to code. He took a deep breath, letting the victory settle in. This was justice. Gerald Whitman sat in his dimly lit apartment, his fingers gripping a half-empty glass of whiskey. This was not how things were supposed to go. He had spent years building his power, had shaped Oak Ridge into his vision. He had ruled the board with an iron fist, crushed resistance before it even had a chance to grow. And now he had nothing. The HOA was gone. The board had scattered. His personal accounts were under investigation. And to add insult to injury, his legacy had been turned into a dog park. A dog park. Gerald slammed the glass onto the table, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Karen had already cut and run, moved to another state before any legal consequences could catch up to her. Steve had flipped, fully cooperating with the investigators in exchange for leniency. Linda, the secretary, had resigned before the storm even hit. And Gerald? Gerald was left to drown alone. His phone vibrated, a new email. His blood turned to ice when he saw the sender. Internal Revenue Service. With shaking hands, he opened it. A single sentence stared back at him. Your request for an appeal has been denied. Gerald let out a slow, shaky breath. This wasn't over. Not yet. Daniel Carter stood in the middle of what used to be his front yard. The lot had been cleared of debris. Fresh grass was being planted. The space was open, bright, alive. A few feet away, a group of homeowners had gathered around a massive LED billboard that had been installed at the entrance of the park. The screen flickered on, playing its first video. It was security footage. Footage of the HOA board meeting where Gerald and Karen had laughed about illegally demolishing his home. Footage of Gerald's arrest. Footage of the moment the FBI had stormed the HOA office. A collection of moments that spelled out the downfall of Oak Ridge's most hated organization. The crowd erupted into cheers. Daniel crossed his arms, watching. He had won. The HOA was gone. But then, his phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "We have a problem." His smirk faded. "Gerald's out." Daniel's jaw tightened. House arrest. His lawyers pulled some strings. He's not walking away free, but he's not rotting in a cell either. Daniel exhaled slowly. It wasn't enough. "And here's the kicker," Sarah continued. "He's already meeting with investors." Daniel's grip on his phone tightened. What kind of investors? The kind that want to start a new HOA. A long silence stretched between them. Daniel's eyes darkened. "Where?" Sarah sighed. "A few miles from here. They're looking at some old real estate developments. No official name yet, but I found some paperwork filed under Whitman Property Management." Daniel's lips curled into a small knowing smile. "Then I guess I'll have to pay him a visit. The war wasn't over, not yet.